Rahul, thanks for sitting down.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you co-founded Day One. You're the
Yes.
COO. We've been working together for a little while now. But you've had a lot of seasons in your career,
Yeah.
a lot of chapters. Tell me about those.
I started out as a chemical engineer. Probably shouldn't have. It was kind of halfway through my degree that I realized I don't know if I really love learning what I'm learning. But I went through it, worked for a very large oil and gas company, first job out of school. And very quickly I just realized that like what you spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week on is what you're going to spend most of your life on. And you got to kind of like something about it, either the people or what you do or be really good at it. So very quickly realized that wasn't for me. And I made a small tweak. I said, maybe it's not a big company. Maybe I should go to a small company. So I made that move after a couple years. Maybe it's not oil and gas. So I moved to water and wastewater. And next thing you know, 7 years have gone by and I've kind of done these little tweaks. And I think at the ripe age of 27, I kind of realized that, you know, if I want to make a change, I really need to take some time and think about it. So for the first time, I didn't make a career move based on, I need a paycheck, I need a job, like what's the next thing, and actually took some time to breathe. And I took about 2 years, went back to school, got a sports management degree. Everything that I was doing led me to this interesting intersection of sports and youth development. Like I said, got a degree, did a couple of unpaid internships in the sports world. And then the thing that really changed my life was a 1-year service fellowship in India, where I was building ultimate frisbee leagues and kind of trying to create a sports culture in urban slum in rural India. I have a whole bunch of stories around that. We'll talk about that in a bit. But loved the work that I was doing, the people that I was affecting, and like what it made me feel. And I came back to the US in 2010, spent the next 10 years doing nonprofit fundraising, basically setting up 501c3 shops for large education organizations in India and Kenya here. Combined aggregate raised around $20 million in the process. And got that itch again a couple years ago and took my next sabbatical, which led me to the innovation space through a number of introductions to accelerators and studios, a world that I was completely unfamiliar with. And here we are.
Here we are.
2 years into Day One.
All right, well, India, big part of your trajectory.
Yeah.
What was going on there?
I thought to myself, look, I've already left the engineering world. I don't have a paycheck for a while. If I'm going to like take a swing, it better be a big swing. I don't want to just do this and get an MBA and come back and do the same type of job. And so I started making decisions based on what I would regret not having chosen on my deathbed. And so it was like I can do a 1-year service fellowship with an amazing program. And I learned a lot. You know, the general mindset of when you're going to quote unquote the developing world is to go in with your college degree and your education and your worldly views and kind of identify and prescribe a solution. And in reality, like the best lesson that I learned is just kind of keep your mouth shut for a year and listen to people and understand their problems and help co-create solutions and understand what solutions have been presented, what worked, what didn't work. And so just the values, the people, the conversations that I learned in that year have guided like every decision, personal, professional, that I've made since then.
What would you say were the 3 biggest experiences and learnings from India?
3 is hard. One was, again, going back to listening. Like I have an example. There was a case study that we learned about. Back then, affordable housing was kind of the big thing in the development world.
What years was this?
2009 to 2011,
okay.
Roughly. Multilateral international development organizations were cranking out affordable housing. They sent in a consulting firm to go to some of the slums of Mumbai and drop these housing pieces in because it was better sanitation, better hygiene, better plumbing, all these things that kind of we associate with just a higher standard of living. They put these things in, and 6 months later they realized that like the general happiness of the community wasn't as high because what they had unintentionally done was undercut, I believe, like a $3 billion construction industry in the informal sector. So now you had all these unemployed men at home with nothing to do, doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing or wouldn't be doing if they had, livelihood means. And like that was a big learning around like unintended consequences of like solving problems that are problems in your head, but if they're not necessarily problems in that community, you're not really doing anything outside of just kind of fulfilling
Sure.
what you thought you wanted.
The
to
savior
do.
complex.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
That was a big learning. There was another piece around kindness and generosity. We ran a lot of workshops for like schools, municipal schools, government schools, and private schools. And we would always run these experiments of running these leadership programs for young kids. I'm talking like primary, secondary school. We would do them in kind of a lower income school, and then we would turn around 2 weeks later and do it at a very like high dollar amount private school. And we would end these workshops with, as a thank you, and kind of, we'd give snacks out. And as part of that, there was a basket of like candy. And we always told people to take one piece of candy. And what you would find more often than not, and I remember the first time because it was quite jarring, we were in a low income school and a girl came up and grabbed a whole handful. And the natural inclination was like, there's rules and whatever. And so, but again, we took that lesson of kind of keeping your mouth shut. Turns out she grabbed a handful to go back and hand to every one of her little cousins and every one of the little kids. And again, that was not discussed. It's a role that she plays. And so, again, with the mindset of the frame of like, there's rules and we need to follow them, you were surprised. We almost were surprised by like the character and the capabilities of this young girl. And then you would turn to some of the higher income schools and, I don't want to paint too broad of a stroke, but you would rarely see that type of behavior in those schools. And so the biggest takeaway that I had is like the kindness and the generosity of lower income folks and communities blew me away. Because you almost don't expect that,
So tell me about the Frisbee leagues you were doing in India.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was a fellowship called Indicor that isn't around anymore. But it was this idea that like fitness and wellness and just getting out there and running around is a big piece of childhood and adolescence. And in certain communities, for whatever reason, there's a overemphasis on education. Kids just don't get out and play, and especially girls, right? In a place like India, the idea of an adolescent girl running around and playing sports was just not accepted by society. So we chose Ultimate Frisbee for a number of reasons. It's self-refereed. There's a whole conflict resolution piece around there. It's technically non-touch, so you technically can play co-ed. But the idea here was, so we set up boys' leagues, and then a couple weeks later in all these different communities that we were in, we would approach families around, well, why aren't your girls allowed to play? And then you really started digging into some deeper conversations around what a girl should and shouldn't do based on society, and then what a girl should and shouldn't do based on what the actual parents want for them. And what we learned across the board is like parents want the best for their kids, whether they're boys or girls, but sometimes society and the constructs around that don't allow for that. There were so many villages we went to where there were examples of like, people educating girls, adolescent girls, but ultimately then unfortunately realizing that it was hard to get them married because the boys and the families of those boys and those surrounding communities didn't value that in the way that we would when we go in and say educate the girls. And so, you invest in a girl in one area, but then later on you realize that you've actually kind of diminished her chances of getting married in the local community, which is what people have done century after century. And so again, unintended consequences, right? You think you're doing good now, but most of these systems are quite complex and you have to think about those things. And again, most of us go in and we do a week or a month or a year of kind of research, but we don't really talk to the customer.
Sure. So now you're building a company.
Yeah.
Totally going down the entrepreneurial path.
Yeah.
Do you think about this often? Is this relevant in how you're building?
All the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to I didn't know this at the time because like I said, I don't have like classical training around startups or entrepreneurship, but like we were doing customer discovery. We were doing minimum viable testing. The projects that worked is when you co-created with the customer and you asked them, what is your problem? How can we fix this? What can we do about it? And having them ultimately be part of the solution and then designing a solution for them. Even the collaboration, the example of the little girl taking the candies back and giving it to kind of the other kids, that kindness and collaboration is something that I've been blown away by in the early stage startup world. Where, folks coming from private sector, we're taught to kind of keep our ideas behind lock and key because someone's going to be out there and steal and take them. But what I've learned in the past 2 or 3 years is it's amazing. Some of those themes around kindness, generosity, collaboration are so prevalent. And I think that's, when Andrew and I started day one, we wanted to be sure that like those values were always going to be core to the community, and that's a lot of what we look for in people. That's a lot of what drives the collaboration and teamwork that you see within the community, and we hope that kind of is a core foundation of kind of what we're building.
Yeah, I find one piece, a lot of your story is very interesting, but one piece in particular really jumps out at me. I mean, across your whole career, you've worked with some of the richest people in the world, right?
Yeah.
But you've also lived with some of the financially poorest people in the world. Combine all those experiences, what would you say was your biggest learning from that?
Yeah. For the longest time, people would like send their kids to me around like, Rahul's done a whole bunch of career changes, and I've told that story now probably hundreds of times, and I think it's just been, my relationship with risk. Like I've just been able to embrace risk a bit more, and I've always wondered what was it about me that like wasn't worried about not having a paycheck for a couple of years. And I could never really articulate it until India kind of solidified a lot of this for me, which is you see the risk taking with the people who kind of have the least, and they're entrepreneurial, right? They're
less
trying
to lose.
They have less to lose, and there's a courage there. Like there really is a courage there. Well, they'll go out and try and test because they almost get the sense of like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you think about risk appetites for people that are extremely wealthy. Because they have the financial cushion, they generally take on more risk. And I think those of us in the middle, those of us that fall in the middle, which is a very large middle, we tend to compare ourselves with the folks above us on the ladder and say, well, until we have that financial cushion, we probably shouldn't be able to take this risk. But my big learning is that we should equally look at folks at the base of the pyramid and say that they don't have a financial cushion. Why is their relationship with risk so much healthier? And I think that's been my biggest takeaway is like, I think there's actually more lessons we can learn from the ingenuity and the grit and the determination and the risk taking of people that probably have less than most of us. And we tend to not do that, right? We tend to always kind of look at the super wealthy people and like make that comparison instead.
How many first-time entrepreneurs would you say you talk to on a weekly basis right now?
50.
50 a week.
Yeah.
How many investors a week?
25.
25 investors a week. So, 75 folks that are kind of on the both ends of that spectrum there.
Yeah.
What do you think? What are you seeing pattern-wise is coming up here with those conversations on the topic of risk?
Similar. It's actually quite similar. There's a lot of pattern matching. There's a lot of pattern matching.
Now we're getting into a human nature conversation.
Yeah, we are getting into a human nature conversation. I think people say they want to break the mold, but sometimes the actions don't match, I think, the message.
What do you think they mean when they say the mold?
Status quo, maybe what their perception is of what they should be. I think a lot of it has to do with identity.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speak so much on the investor side, but with founders, founder identity is the biggest. One of my biggest learnings, like I said, from this India thing is like, I didn't identify as an entrepreneur 3-4 years ago, right? I was a guy who fundraised, I probably did some management stuff, I started a couple things, but turns out that like, if you just replace some of the terminology with like something that's a little more layman, these are just behaviors and mindsets that people are, I think the best part of these conversations with the founders every week is like it takes me 5 or 10 minutes and you're able to convince these people that they are already way more of an entrepreneur than they think they are. And I think that identity piece is almost like the first wall you have to crash through for people to feel like, all the stuff we're talking about. What's the worst that can happen, right? Most of us have these safety nets. We have some combination of savings or friends or family or somebody with a couch you can sleep on, right? At the end of the day, if you fail at a business idea or venture or whatever, a little bit of humiliation and maybe you got to pick yourself off the ground a little bit, but you're just going to dust yourself off and do it over again.
And you're so much better off because you learned, you grew.
Yeah.
You met people along the way.
Yeah, and
figured
stories,
stuff out.
right? Like I love telling stories. I'm a storyteller. Like people love telling stories.
Yep.
Right. One of the things we tell people at day one is like, if you ask the right customer discovery questions and they're open-ended and you give people a platform to share a story about a pain around a certain thing, you'll just be wowed by the amount of information they give you.
Yeah. I'm very intrigued by what you just said, which is shockingly high numbers of people that are actually way more entrepreneurial than they give themselves credit for.
Oh, yeah.
Paint that picture a little bit for me.
You know what I used to think? I was one of those people that like thought entrepreneurs were like either geniuses or like they were amazing inventors and they invented a thing and like just amazingly like they realized 1 million people wanted to buy the thing and that's how you start a business. And again, what I've learned in the past 3-4 years through Andrew and you and all these people that kind of have a little more kind of entrepreneurial background in terms of education and kind of the stuff that you've done is like, that's not it. It's a behavior, it's a mindset, it's a very simple playbook that in my opinion has been gated for way too long. And you just have to have like your tribe, like your community of people that are there cheering you on. The mental side of it is 1,000,000 times harder than the actual steps of like talking to people and launching things and seeing if it works. And I think once too many of us are tied to results. And if the potential result doesn't justify the action, we talk ourselves out of taking the actions. And I think the biggest thing around entrepreneurship that I love and I embrace is like, forget about the result and just enjoy the journey and let the road take you where it takes you. Mm-hmm. You'll meet people, you'll make friends, you'll find and learn things about the market, your customer, yourself, your product that you probably didn't even know before.
Sure. We touched on this a little bit, but what would you say is your biggest piece of advice to an aspiring entrepreneur, given that you talk to so many and have seen so many come and go?
Embrace that risk. Don't be scared. Yeah. Like honestly, like write it down on a sheet of paper. What's the worst thing that could happen? And you'll realize most of those things are things you'll be able to bounce back from.
I did this exercise in college. This guy had us taking entrepreneurship classes. He said, your homework tonight is to go home and write down your failure plan on a piece of paper with a pen. What is the absolute worst case scenario? You know, if you fail, you hit rock bottom, like visualize what that looks like, and then create a plan as to how you're going to deal with it. Maybe your house burns down, right? And you have to figure out where you're going to go sleep tonight, or you have $0 in your bank account and you're starving and you got to go find a meal. Like, what do you do? Who do you call? How do you go feed yourself? What do you do? Create a plan. Put it in an envelope and put that up on a shelf somewhere. And then go start a company. And after a month or 6 months or a year, like things are going to suck. Something's going to happen. You're going to lose a customer. You're going to maybe get a cease and desist, whatever. And it's actually never going to be as bad as the plan you wrote down. Go pull out that envelope and read it and realize it could be a lot worse.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And there's I use this term a lot around connecting the dots backwards. If you ask 22-year-old version of me, like this is what my life was going to play out like, I'd be like, what the. Yeah. But now what I've always been able to do is like connect the dots backwards. Mm-hmm. And then you tell your story and you understand the threads of why you made certain decisions. It's almost like you don't need to know to 100% of why you're making that decision always. It'll all make sense when you look back and connect those dots.
Yep. What's your biggest wish for entrepreneurs these days?
Oh, God.
That's the closing question for you.
Yeah, I think patience and trusting in the process. Mm-hmm. I think we are so, again, back to that results piece, like we want to put a date to things and we want to figure out at a percentage point how much we can de-risk things to XYZ to get there. And it is about like patience, trusting the process, learning from the process, not putting undue pressure on yourself is a big piece. Like be fair and kind to yourself. Yep. It's not easy. Like starting a business is not a thing that like people can just plan and say, I'm going to do it in 14 weeks. Yeah. It actually goes back to the story of when I left philanthropy and started at day one. I did another kind of 18-month or so sabbatical, did a VC fellowship. Through that, got to know somebody who was very well versed in this world. She knew all the venture studios in town. We go talk to people. I wasn't, I think, a venture backable founder at the time, but I met a guy named Andrew Hutton at a place called Human Ventures. 3 months later, I got into a startup community. That person introduced me to somebody else. And so what I'm getting at is like, there's so many fellows that we talk to, there's so many people that are founders that are interested in understanding like, what am I going to get in 8 weeks? And part of that patience and trust is like true, authentic relationship building, where you feel like you're there to provide value to everybody you meet, and in turn, you'll get value from them. The value won't necessarily match what you think or hope to get at that time, but again, trust, right? It was a series of 3 or 4 introductions over 2 years that ultimately led me to joining Andrew to start Day One 2 years ago, and you know, for me, that was a big driver of what I wanted to recreate for Day One.
Yep.
Right? In the course of 6 months, I met people at a fund. I started writing angel checks. I became a mentor and advisor at a number of kind of accelerators here in town. Probably met 100 founders. Met Andrew. And that took me 2 years. And I thought to myself, from the hundreds of founders that I had talked to in this space that said that they'd be interested in a program like Day One, I thought to myself, like, why can't we build a community or program that could bring all those people into the same community and condense my 2-year timeline into 3 months for people?
Yep.
And so
Yep.
That's been the most rewarding for me in the last 2.5 years, when fellows come up to me and we say, wow, like 3 months ago I knew nothing about this world, and now I feel like I'm pretty well connected
Yep.
and know what my next step should be.
Totally. Love it. How can people watching and listening stay in touch with you and follow along?
Yeah, so Twitter, I'm not super active on Twitter, but Rahul B tweets. LinkedIn is generally where I live, Rahul Brahmbhatt. JoinDay1.com, my LinkedIn's on there. I'm still on Facebook, one of the few dinosaurs, but pretty easy to find. Rahul at JoinDay1.com. Yeah.
Awesome.
Wherever Jake's at, I'm probably not too far behind. So.
Good stuff, man. Appreciate
Cool.
it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep. Got this great view here, so it's
Yes.
a good conversation.